It was supposed to be the simplest morning, just a quick walk with Buddy, the family dog, before the day really started. 17-year-old Adrienne Ewing had done this 100 times before. Her mom, Marissa, watched them head out the door that Saturday in July, like any other weekend. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd see her daughter for an entire year. One moment, Adrienne was there. The next, she and Buddy just vanished. No fight, no struggle, no note, just gone. The kind of disappearance that turns a quiet, suburban life upside down. The police searched, volunteers searched, days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Hope faded, replaced by a terrible, aching void. Everyone moved on, but Marissa couldn't. How do you move on when your child just disappears into thin air? For 365 long days, Marissa lived in that void. She clung to every theory, every tiny lead. No matter how small, the house stayed exactly the same, waiting for Adrienne to come back through the front door like nothing happened. Then, out of nowhere, a miracle, or so it seemed. A hunter, miles away in the dense Coeur National Forest, was tracking elk with his thermal drone. But what his drone picked up wasn't an elk. It was something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The heat signature was unmistakable. It was a dog that had been missing for a year. Adrienne's dog, Buddy. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. The news hit like lightning. Buddy was found, tied to a tree, but alive, fed, cared for. This wasn't just a clue. This was a sign. A sign that maybe, just maybe, Adrienne was out there too. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small Idaho town and reignited the search with a fervor not seen in months. Search teams rushed back into the forest. Volunteers poured in, and Marissa, fueled by a year of pent-up hope and fear, felt her heart hammering with a terrible, fragile thing she hadn't dared feel in so long. Real, tangible hope. Buddy was alive, which could only mean one thing. Adrienne might be too. The forest where Buddy was found became the epicenter of a massive operation. Everyone was involved, including staff from Adrienne's high school. Among them was Mr. Tobias Chandler, Adrienne's dedicated AP biology teacher. He was known for his commitment, his after-school tutoring sessions with top students like Adrienne. He was the kind of teacher parents trusted, the kind who knew their students' dreams and anxieties. He was there at Marissa's house that morning, helping organize the search teams, his voice steady and reassuring. But something about Mr. Chandler felt off. To Marissa, anyway. Maybe it was the brand new hiking gear he showed up in, or how quickly he volunteered to lead a team into the most dangerous part of the forest, specifically steering Marissa away from that area. Maybe it was the way he talked about Adrienne, with an intimacy that seemed too deep for a teacher-student relationship. He knew things, personal things. He mentioned her worries about getting into college, her feelings about her parents' divorce, things Marissa didn't even know her daughter had shared. He talked about private tutoring sessions, special study spots, a level of connection that made Marissa's skin prickle with unease. When she checked Adrienne's old school planner, the dates and details didn't match up with what Mr. Chandler was saying. Worse were the little notes Adrienne had written to herself. Mentions of gifts from Mr. C, a pink bracelet, a special laptop, secret study spots, and a promise to keep it all hidden, even from her best friend. The search teams were getting ready to head out, Mr. Chandler's team included, supposedly heading northeast towards the forest. But Marissa couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at her gut. Instead of joining her assigned team, she made a decision that would change everything. She followed Mr. Chandler. She watched him drive, not towards the forest, but in the opposite direction, taking turns that led him further away from the search zone. He stopped, checked his mirrors nervously, and eventually pulled into the driveway of a secluded old house. Not just any house. A house owned by his late grandmother, a house he'd mysteriously taken off the rental market just weeks before Adrienne disappeared. Marissa watched him disappear inside. What was he doing here? Why wasn't he searching for her daughter? Hidden in the woods behind the property, Marissa crept closer. The house looked normal from the front, but the back told a different story. Basement windows were mostly blocked with glass blocks, but one small ventilation window wasn't. And through that gap, Marissa saw something that made her blood freeze. There was her daughter's backpack, unmistakable with its patched smiley face, and the unmistakable setup of a classroom. In a basement, her heart hammering, she pressed closer. She could hear voices, Mr. Chandler's voice, calm and controlled, talking about lunch, about schoolwork, and another voice, a young girl's voice, responding. It was Adrienne, alive, right there, trapped. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. She had to call the police. She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. But just as she whispered the address, a sharp crack echoed behind her. She'd stepped on a solar light. The back door flew open. Mr. Chandler stood there, his composed teacher mask completely gone, replaced by something terrifying. Rage. He'd found her. The sound of his voice, cold and certain, echoing through the trees, snapped Marissa back into action. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she forced them to move faster. She could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind her. Closer now. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should have stayed hidden. Should have called the police first. But panic had taken over. All she knew was that she had seen her daughter, alive, and now she was running from the man who had taken her. The Camry's door handle was slick with her sweat as she yanked it open, fumbling for the lock as his footsteps thundered closer. The engine turned over once, twice, and then roared to life just as Mr. Chandler burst through the tree line. His face twisted with rage. She peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind her, just as his hands slammed against the passenger window. In her rearview mirror, she saw him stumble, arms windmilling, before he righted himself and sprinted back toward his own car. Her hands shook so violently on the steering wheel she could barely control the car as she careened down the dirt road. She needed to get to safety, needed to call for help, but her phone was gone, shattered somewhere in his yard. The main road appeared ahead, and she took it without thinking, her mind racing. He knew where she lived, knew her routine, had been close enough to manipulate Adrienne for months, right under everyone's noses. How many times had she thanked him for tutoring her daughter? How many times had she seen him at school events? So helpful, so dedicated. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. It took her 10 minutes, driving erratically through the winding country roads, to make it to the nearest gas station with a payphone. Her voice cracked as she begged the dispatcher Bethany to confirm they had sent help to Rimrock Road. "Yes, ma'am, units are en route now," the dispatcher assured her, her voice calm and professional. A stark contrast to Marissa's hysteria. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. She slumped against the payphone booth, tears streaming down her face. But she couldn't stop. She had to get back, had to make sure they found Adrienne, had to make sure Mr. Chandler couldn't hurt her again. She looked down at her clothes, torn and dirty from her desperate flight through the woods, and realized she was still clutching Adrienne's old-school planner, the one that had revealed the horrifying truth about the tutoring sessions. Back on Highway 95, driving toward the Coeur d'Alene National Forest, where the search teams were still combing for clues based on Buddy's discovery, Marissa's mind replayed everything. The inconsistencies about the tutoring schedule, the secretive tone, the gifts, the special study spots, it all made a grotesque kind of sense now. He hadn't just been grooming Adrienne. He had been preparing her, convincing her that she needed him, that the outside world, including her own mother, was a threat. The planner entries, the pink bracelet, the private laptop, the isolated meetings, it was textbook manipulation, hidden in plain sight behind the facade of academic dedication. And Buddy, poor Buddy, tied to a tree and fed regularly. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been a pawn, a cruel insurance policy to keep hope alive for Marissa while directing the search away from the truth. The thought made her stomach churn. As she drove, she passed the turnoff for the forest where volunteers, including Coach Rodriguez and the other teachers, were likely still searching grid by grid, calling Adrienne's name, unaware that the real monster was already in custody. Thanks to Marissa's gut instinct and desperate chase through the woods. The irony was staggering. They were looking for traces in the wilderness while the crime scene, the prison, had been hidden in plain sight, in a house he legally owned, beneath their very noses. She thought about the basement room she'd glimpsed through that small window, the desk, the whiteboard, Adrienne's backpack. It was horrifying, a twisted parody of a classroom. How had he convinced her to stay? How had he made her believe that a year of captivity was better than freedom? The answer, she knew, lay in the psychological hold he had built over months of careful manipulation, convincing her daughter that she was special, chosen, and that the world outside was unworthy of her brilliance. Marissa's phone, miraculously, began to ring. She fumbled for it, seeing Detective Holbrook's name flash across the screen. "Mrs. Ewing," his voice was urgent. "We've apprehended Mr. Chandler. Units are at the Rimrock Road address now." Her breath caught. Did you ... Did you find her? There was a pause, heavy with meaning. "Yes, we found Adrienne. She's alive." The words hit her like a physical force, and she had to pull over onto the shoulder. The steering wheel suddenly too much to hold. Is she ... Is she okay? Physically, she seemed stable. "She's being taken to Senai Health Hospital now." But the detective's voice trailed off. "But what?" Marissa whispered, already knowing the answer wasn't going to be simple. "Mrs. Ewing, she's been through something ... extensive. We need you at the hospital. There's a lot we need to discuss, about what happened, and about what comes next." The line went dead, and Marissa sat in her car, overwhelmed. Adrienne was alive. That was the miracle, the impossible thing that had happened. But as she sat there, catching her breath, she realized that finding her daughter was only the beginning. The real challenge, the long, painful road to recovery, was just starting. What had that monster done to her mind during that year? How do you fix a year of stolen life, of psychological imprisonment? Marissa started the car again, her destination clear, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the nightmare was far from over. Even though its darkest chapter might finally be closing, Weeks that followed felt like walking through thick fog for Marissa. The physical rescue of her daughter was just the beginning, as Dr. Morrison had warned. Adrienne was home, but she wasn't there yet. The house, once a shrine to her absence, now felt different, filled with a presence that was physically safe but emotionally distant. Adrienne spent hours at the kitchen table, poring over the schoolwork Detective Holbrook's team had retrieved from the basement, frantically trying to catch up on a year she'd lost, a year that Chandler had twisted into something she believed was necessary. "I need to finish my calculus," she'd say, panic creeping into her voice if anyone suggested she rest. Mr. C said colleges don't care about excuses, only results. It broke Marissa's heart to hear the captor's name spoken so casually, so respectfully. Even now, the legal proceedings moved swiftly. Tobias Chandler, once a respected teacher, was charged with aggravated kidnapping, false imprisonment, and multiple counts of sexual assault. The evidence was overwhelming. The concealed room, Adrienne's testimony once the initial shock wore off and the reality of her situation began to sink in. The gifts, the diary entries Marissa had found, and the undeniable proof of a year-long, systematic plan. The media attention was relentless. Girl vanished, walking her dog. 1 year later, thermal drone discovery leads to teacher's arrest. Read one headline. Marissa and Adrienne tried to stay out of the public eye, focusing on healing. But the story had captured the imagination and horror of people nationwide. How could someone so trusted, so embedded in the community, orchestrate something so monstrous? The answer, Marissa learned, was in the careful, methodical grooming that had happened right under everyone's noses. Hidden behind the guise of academic dedication, Adrienne's therapy sessions became as routine as her schoolwork, maybe more so. Dr. Morrison worked tirelessly to help her understand that her worth wasn't defined by grades, that love wasn't conditional, and that what Chandler did was a crime, not a gift. Slowly, painfully, Adrienne began to remember who she was before the basement, before the assignments became her entire world. She remembered laughing with her best friend Jess, remembered hiking the trails she'd once loved, remembered a time when her biggest worry was making the volleyball team, not maintaining a perfect GPA for a man who stole her life. The day she finally threw the pink bracelet, the symbol of Chandler's manipulation, into the trash, Marissa found herself crying happy tears. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory, a step back towards the daughter she'd lost, and was slowly, surely, getting back. Months passed. The house felt lighter, filled with tentative laughter instead of anxious silence. Adrienne started attending Lakeland High again, not as the isolated, pressure-filled student Chandler had created, but as herself, supported by her mother, her school, and a community that had rallied around them. The college question, once a source of overwhelming anxiety, became manageable. Several universities, moved by her story and recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, offered her admission or the chance to reapply after a gap year, focused on genuine recovery, not Chandler's twisted curriculum. She chose the latter, deciding she needed time to truly heal and rediscover her passions outside the shadow of someone else's expectations. Marissa watched her daughter plant a small garden in the backyard, something she'd never shown interest in before, just because she wanted to see what would grow. It was a simple act, but it represented everything: choice, freedom, and the ability to nurture something beautiful without needing permission or fearing punishment. One evening, nearly a year after Buddy's miraculous discovery by the hunters, thermal drone, Marissa sat on the porch with Adrienne and Buddy himself, now fully recovered and more beloved than ever. The dog had been the thread that led them back to each other, a symbol of hope that never died. Adrienne reached over and scratched behind his ears, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Do you think the hunter knew how much finding you would change everything?" she asked quietly. Marissa looked out at the darkening sky, thinking about that July morning when everything changed, and how a random scan of the forest had ultimately unraveled a carefully constructed nightmare. "I don't think he knew," she said finally, "but I'm grateful he looked. Sometimes, the smallest actions lead to the biggest miracles." Adrienne nodded, leaning slightly into her mother's side. The road ahead wasn't fully clear. Healing never was, but it was their road, walked together, free from the shadows of the past. The girl who had vanished walking her dog was gone, replaced by a young woman learning to trust herself again, surrounded by love, and finally, truly, home. The nightmare was over, and the long, complex journey of rebuilding a life stolen had begun, one brave step at a time.